Alright, today we'll be tearing down a 1975 Kawasaki KE100. And this motor has got a lot of Phillips screws on it. So we've got an impact driver here that we will take some of these out with. And I've loosened a lot of them, that way we don't take a lot of time to pull them out. But what you do with an impact driver, you grab a hammer and then a Phillips bit on the end of it here. You just take and you kind of put pressure on it, turning it counterclockwise to remove the screw, and then tap on it just like that. We've got them all ready to come out, and I didn't take them out just so I could show you exactly where they were. So to take the, this is the Stator flywheel cover here. We'll remove these bolts, and then I'll show you how to remove that stator. We've got your shift shaft down here, so a lot of times with build up, there's a lot that'll a lot of times hold you up. But here's your countershaft sprocket here, and this is the cover that covers up your flywheel and your stator assembly in here. This is your wires that run out. We've got two connectors here, and we'll go ahead and get ready to remove that flywheel. We will remove this bolt here that holds that countershaft sprocket in. To do that, I try to keep them held so that they don't spin. That's evidently a 13 on this one. So go ahead and spin that off. It's just a splined gear coming out of there. Now to get your flywheel off there, this is back to a 14 millimeter. Pull that off of there, and then we've got a flywheel puller here, and this is a 27 by 1 millimeter threaded puller, and left-hand threads. So it goes in there the opposite way that you would normally turn a screw on or off. There's a washer down in here, and I like to remove these washers just so we can get that puller to seat even farther. Then take it and spin it on there just like that. And this flywheel here has never been off, so we'll see how difficult it is to remove. 17 millimeter and then you screw that in and just popped right off of there. So that's all you have to do. Take this center pin here, the center bolt will run down, push against the crank, pull that flywheel off. So there's your flywheel there. Make sure your weights are intact, make sure there's no damage to there, make sure there's no grooving. Then we've got your stator assembly here, your points assembly. And these wires again run up here, and then it seals right here. I don't see it very well, but seals right here with that rubber seal. So now what we'll do is take the impact driver again, spin it the way that it needs to turn. It's just regular screws here. Two Phillips holding this on. All right, that flywheel is ready to come off now. Or the stator is ready to come off. All right, there's your stator assembly there. We've got one plug going to this sensor here, and there's your stator for this machine. Next, we've got a lot of Phillips here to pull that crank, or split that crankcase. Here's your head. That cylinder was already pulled, but this is the head for the machine. Make sure you're careful so you don't break these fins here. That's what cools the motor down. Helps cool the motor down. So we'll go ahead and flip this over here. We'll pull, this will be your oil pump side, as well as your clutch side. So a lot of Phillips screws on this side as well. Again, we've loosened them up, so they'd be ready for you. 3 Phillips to remove this oil pump cover here. and this is where your oil pump sits. So we've got your cable running in here, and this cable here controls your oil pump. Now to remove this cable, you turn the oil pump and then unhook it down in the bottom there. If we can, that looks like it's been smashed a little bit. Loosen up there and slide that out. So that's your cable there. And then we'll have to pull this cover to finish removing it. Then 3 Phillips screws to remove this cover. And then there's a spring on this boot here that we'll need to pull to remove this boot off of this cover. Be careful not to rip that boot. These will be hard to come by if they don't make them anymore. So just pull that boot up enough to pull that cover off. There's your carburetor there. So there's the carburetor there. Cables run down in here. Here's your choke assembly on the top. Here's your idle adjust. Everything's protected. We've got your air filter that sits right above your motor here. Comes in here. Everything comes in and goes through this carburetor. This carburetor is well protected in there, so a lot of times these carburetors are still in great condition. So here's your clutch cable here, and it runs down underneath your motor, underneath this carburetor, and runs into this assembly here. And I will try to get this to a spot where you guys can see that, and we'll start pulling that off. A lot of these bolts are loosened up. I loosened them up already, but there'll still be some that's not. Here's a plug on the front of this cover here. We can remove this plug. It's just a rubber plug there. We can get a flat screwdriver, fit down in there, and loosen this carburetor. And that's how you pull that carburetor off there without having to pull this cover. So there's a nut on the other side of this flat screw that may spin, so just kind of keep an eye on that. And then you're able to pull that carburetor off of there. Make sure that boot isn't hooked on the back side of this case, and then just kind of work it off there. All right, and then we've got a oil line or fuel line running down here. You can see this is the fuel line here. I'll try prying that off. There's a wire holding this one on. Evidently somebody's been in there, and generally a clamp that would go on there. And we've got your oil. You can see that there, your oil cable coming down here, your oil pump cable going over to the oil pump. So it kind of runs down the same line with the carburetor. So that'll all have to come off together. It's held on there in this rubber boot. $10mm, we'll remove that cable out of that cover. And then we've already removed it from the oil pump. All right, so we've got the oil line off of here. This is the oil control cable here. This goes up along with the throttle cable. Then we've got your carburetor here. It's a Mikuni carburetor, choke assembly up top here, and we'll go through and clean that in a separate video. Got your clutch cable down here, and we've got a Phillips on the bottom that we'll need to remove to get this cable out of here. It's kind of a housing for that cable. That one's evidently not loosened yet. There's always a bit of a challenge when that is Phillips. Alright, I was able to loosen that up. There's kind of a screen going in there for your intake as well. It's a drain for your carburetor. So your drain, if your carburetor leaks fuel at all, bouncing around or traveling, it'll come out of this little cover here. It's got that screen holding that in. So we'll go ahead and pull this clutch cable and unhook it. There's a little tab in there. You can bend it, or sometimes you can finagle it enough to get it around this little tab. But I generally will just take and bend these tabs just slightly. And that'll allow enough room to get that cable out of there. And make sure that tab gets bent down, going back together. Then once you're out of that groove, pull the cable out there, keep the spring with it. There's your clutch cable. Roll that up, but you want to make sure you don't do tight circles with it. All right, we'll go ahead and continue pulling the clutch cover off. We've got to pull that oil pump. I'm just going to flip that motor around there. Two more Phillips. And then a couple Phillips to pull the oil tank off here. And these are a smaller Phillips, so you might want to switch screwdrivers. A lot of times these are a little bit less difficult to come out of there, so I use a Phillips screwdriver, and then sometimes you can get it out just by doing that. Sometimes you got to tap on it with a hammer. So these were able to come out. Just two of these screws holding this on. We got to pull that oil line off. And this one we might just take out. There's an 8mm bolt. It's a banjo bolt, runs that oil into the motor there. No. That banjo bolt has a hole through the center of it. There's your oil pump there. And then it turns that slot down in there. We'll go ahead, finish pulling. And here's your oil check hole here. And that's a 10 millimeter or a Phillips. And that's when you fill in the oil, you pull that plug out and check to make sure that you've got enough oil in there. If we have all the bolts out of there, we should be able to pull that cover off now. Double check everything, but I think that might be all of them. It broke free there, but I don't want to tap on this too hard. Break something. So being really careful if we've got to use a screwdriver, just be careful we don't put too much pressure. I like to use the bigger screwdrivers. That way it doesn't damage it, but I really don't like to use screwdrivers at all, but sometimes on these older motors, leaves you no option. There's one more here, but I'm not sure what, if that's what's holding us. Sometimes the Kickstarter gears there will hold us up because they've got a seal there. Then we'll have your clutch assembly underneath here. We'll pull that apart. All right, there's your clutch there. There's your right hand crankcase cover. That wouldn't be considered splitting the case, but that is part of your case. There's your intake going in there. We've got your Kickstarter gear here, oil pump gear here. That just slides off of there. And we've got your clutch pack here. Evidently we still have oil in this bottom of the motor here. We'll go ahead and pull that clutch off. 8 millimeter, 6 of those 8 millimeter bolts. All right, we'll go ahead and pull that off there. And then we've got a circlip down in the bottom, or a snap ring. Holding this clutch on. All right, now what I like to do then is go ahead and set this back down on there and screw these in. After you have that snap ring out, you can put this back together, and this will just be to kind of keep everything held together. If you're not going to go back together with it right away, well, Huh. Oh, there's a washer that got stuck down in there, stuck on the splines, which kept us from not being able to pull it out. So now you can, let's see if I can get the line up quick. Now we can put everything together just right. There's a washer that fell down. Generally that wouldn't happen. So in behind that snap ring is a washer. And evidently you gotta watch to make sure that doesn't fall down into that snap ring groove, because that's what was keeping us held on there. So I just snug these enough to kind of keep pressure on everything. You don't have to tighten these all the way down. And then when you can pull it off, there's your clutch pack assembly there. There's your clutch basket that can be pulled off at this time. Spring will go with that. There's your shift lever that goes out to the other side. That's what your shift shaft goes on, or the shift pedal goes on. And this you can just pull out. As long as it's not bent, you can pull it out generally fairly easily. It'll slide right through that crankcase. So Kickstarter gear, looks like we got to pull that off from the other side, but there's a couple parts here we can take off now. And this is spring loaded, so just kind of be careful of that. But this will have to come out before it'll slide out actually through the crankcase. And this is just kind of a holder, it holds that spring. You've got your rotary here now. And that's held on by Phillips bolts again. And then we'll go ahead and remove that nut there. That is a 19mm nut. Try to keep this from spinning so it doesn't break anything inside, so I'm just going to hold the piston on this one. There's a keeper on here that is supposed to keep that nut from spinning, but it was already partially bent down. Pull that gear off there. Then there's a keeper that you'll have to pull off as well. And then we can go ahead and pull this cover. And this cover, it's essential that it seals, so don't damage any area there. There you go, and then this plate right there spins. Spins with your crank. So there's that plate there. It's dirty now, but those can be cleaned up. So we've got your shift drum here. On this right here, there's a Phillips keeper holding this together. Now I loosen this one. Sometimes you don't have to come out, but same with this. Most of the time these don't have to come out, but we're just going to pull them out since we were right here. This one's spring loaded, and we've got a 10mm holding this spring loaded arm on here. That spring loaded arm is off. And then we'll flip this back over, pull all those Phillips out, and we'll be able to split that case.